in which the last dangling threads of our story play out in the aftermath of Anna's death. Chapter 10. When Levine thought about what he was and what he lived for, he found no answer and fell into despair. But when he stopped asking himself about it, he seemed to know what he was and what he lived for, because he acted and lived firmly and definitely. Recently he had even lived much more firmly and definitely than before. Returning to the country in the middle of June, he also returned to his usual occupations: farming, relations with the Musics and his neighbors, running the household, his sisters' and brothers' affairs, which were in his hands, relations with his wife and family, cares about the baby. The new interest in bees he had acquired that last spring took up all his time. These things occupied him, not because he justified them to himself by some general views, as he had done formerly. On the contrary, now disappointed by the failure of his earlier undertakings for the general good, on the one hand, and on the other hand too occupied with his thoughts the very quantity of things that piled upon him from all sides, he completely abandoned all considerations of the common good. And these things occupied him only because it seemed to him that he had to do what he was doing, that he could not do otherwise. Formerly, it had begun almost from childhood and kept growing till full maturity. Whenever he had tried to do something that would be good for everyone, for mankind, for Russia, for the district, for the whole village, he had noticed that thinking about it was pleasant, but the doing itself was always awkward. There was no full assurance that the thing was absolutely necessary, and the doing itself, which at the start had seemed so big, kept diminishing and diminishing, dwindling to nothing, while now, after his marriage, when he began to limit himself more and more to living for himself, though he no longer experienced any joy at the thought of what he was doing, he felt certain that his work was necessary, saw that it turned out much better than before, and that it was expanding more and more. Now, as if against his will, he cut deeper and deeper into the soil, like a plough, so that he could no longer get out without turning over the furrow. For the family to live as their fathers and grandfathers had been accustomed to live, that is, in the same cultural conditions and with the same upbringing of children, was undoubtedly necessary. It was as necessary as dinner when one was hungry, and just as for that it was necessary to prepare dinner, so it was necessary to run the farming mechanism of Pokrovsko in such a way as to produce income. As undoubtedly as it was necessary to pay debts, it was also necessary to maintain the family land in such condition that when his son inherited it, he would thank his father, as Levine had thanked his grandfather for everything he had built and planted. And for that it was necessary not to lease the land, but to do the farming personally, to keep cattle, to manure the fields, to plant trees. It was as impossible not to take care of Sergei Ivanovitch's affairs, the affairs of his sister, and of all the Musics who came for advice, and were accustomed to do so, as it was impossible to drop a baby one is already holding in one's arms. It was necessary to see to the comfort of his invited sister-in-law and her children, and of his wife and baby, and it was impossible not to spend at least a small part of the day with them. All that, together with hunting and the new interest in bees, filled that entire life of Levine's, which had no meaning for him when he thought. But besides the fact that Levine firmly knew what he had to do, he knew just as well how he had to do it, how he had to do it all, and which matter was more important than another. He knew that he had to hire workers as cheaply as possible, but that he should not put them in bondage by paying them in advance at a cheaper rate than what they were worth, though it was very profitable. He could sell the music straw when there was a shortage, though he felt sorry for them, but the inn and the pothouse, even though they brought income, had to be eliminated. For felling timber, he had to punish them as severely as possible, but he could not find them for cattle that strayed into his pastures, and though it upset the watchman and eliminated fear, it was impossible not to return the stray cattle. Pyotr, who was paying 10 cents per year to a moneylender, had to be given a loan to redeem him, but it was impossible to let go or postpone the payment of quit rent for non-paying musics. The steward could not be let off if a small meadow was left unmowed and the grass went to waste. Yet he could not mow the 200 acres where a young forest had been planted. He could not excuse a worker who went home during a work period because his father had died, no matter how sorry he felt for him, and he had to pay him less for the costly months he missed. But it was impossible not to give monthly payments to old, useless household serfs. Levine also knew that on returning home he must first of all go to his wife if she was unwell, and that the Mujiks who had been waiting for 3 hours could wait longer, and he knew that, despite all the pleasure he experienced when hiring a swarm, he would have to give up that pleasure and let the old man hive the swarm without him, and go to talk with the peasants who had come looking for him at the apiary. Whether he was acting well or badly he did not know, and not only would not start proving it now, but even avoided talking or thinking about it. Reasoning led him into doubt, and kept him from seeing what he should and should not do. Yet, when he did not think, but lived, he constantly felt in his soul the presence of an infallible judge who decided which of two possible actions was better, and which was worse, and whenever he did not act as he should, he felt it at once. And so he lived, not knowing and not seeing any possibility of knowing what he was and why he was living in the world, tormented by this ignorance to such a degree that he feared suicide, and at the same time firmly laying down his own particular, definite path in life. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.